Hello, amazing visionaries. This is Lorna and today I am so excited to bring to you Julian Palmer. Julian has been deeply exploring psychoactive plants for the last 17 years and has spoken at conferences in Australia and overseas on this subject over the last 13 years. He facilitates non-traditional spaces for psychedelic plant medicine work and is also the inventor of Changa, which we will hear more about in this conversation. He will share with us his work with DMT, plus the tools and techniques of traversing visionary states. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julian.
Thanks, great to be here.
So I'm so curious to hear about your journey on how you were able to facilitate plant medicine rituals or retreats, and what inspired you to create Changa, which seems to have made its way all over the world. I was first introduced to Changa in Brazil, and I had no idea that you were the person associated with its creation until I Googled you and discovered your Wikipedia entry. And so I'm fascinated with that process of creation. Would you please share with us your journey?
Well, around 1999, I started to get deeply involved with psychedelics. A friend introduced me to DMT, and I think, like a lot of people, when you first smoke DMT, it's such a startling event in your life. It seems to open up the pineal gland, and for the next week, everything is hyper vivid and alive. And of course, I got fascinated with it. I was living in the area around Byron Bay in northern New South Wales in Australia, very beautiful part of Australia. And only a few people knew about DMT. It was very rare back then. So something very exotic and strange. And it felt like, wow, this is something to really explore. So I wanted to explore it and understand it. So I got deeply involved. And around 2003, 2004, Changa came about. I pronounce it Changa. That's the very much Australian pronunciation. It came about because we were extracting goo from acacia, and there's not much you can do with goo. You can't actually smoke goo as easily as crystal. So it was an obvious thing to me to infuse it into herbs, especially ayahuasca vine, which I was smoking at the time by itself. And so we realized that it was incredibly powerful and beautiful to use other herbs with the ayahuasca vine, which acted like admixture plants. So very similar to how shamans in the Amazon use other plants in the ayahuasca tea. When you combine those plants with DMT and ayahuasca vine in a smoke, the qualities of those plants are activated in the smoke. And so some of those plants, like mullein, for example, allow the DMT to be more easily smoked, and it actually smokes a little bit smoother, and you can smoke it more easily because mullein is traditionally a long herb. So this was a fascinating line of inquiry, and I simply started to share the acacia tea with people around early 2002. I started to prepare tea from acacia phyllodes, which are the leaves, and Syrian rue, and I started sharing it with people. And I started small with small groups, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's incredible work.
That is really fascinating. So technically, Changa could be any mix of psychotropic plants, but with a base of plant-based DMT extraction. How do we know exactly what is in the Changa if somebody offers it to us, for example?
Well, you don't really know what's in it. I think if it looks, some of it is just ayahuasca vine. You can see that it's brown. It's maybe 50% ayahuasca vine. And people will generally tell you the percentage, whether it's 20% DMT or 70% DMT, which is a little bit ridiculous because you don't have much herbs in your 70% Changa. And for when I first began doing this, Changa was never about making a strong form of smokable DMT, because DMT is incredibly strong. It was about making a very gentle form of DMT, a more sub-breakthrough integrated form of DMT that people could use quite regularly without blowing their brains out smoking this DMT crystal, which is something you might only want to do like once or twice in your life. So with Changa, you could smoke it every week, or I know people who smoke it every day for years and found a lot of healing and benefit in that.
So is there any type of concern over what kinds of plants to put in your Changa mix? Because I know that one of the key concerns around the expansion of neo-shamanism, and neo-shamanism being defined as, you know, shamanic practices that are a cross-cultural blend of traditions, beliefs, and techniques. You know, one of the key concerns is dangerous mixtures of medicines. And so is there anything that we should be aware of when creating our own Changa or when being offered Changa by somebody else?
Well, yeah, I mean, you would hope that the people making it have tested it on themselves and other people if they're going to try new recipes. There are some tried and true recipes online. The original recipe blend, which I still use, is ayahuasca vine or leaf, peppermint, passion flower and mullein, and blue lily or blue lotus. And that works fantastic, and I haven't found better herbs than that. Sometimes you can add herbs to it, which can create some undesirable effects. But for the most part, people will find the beneficial effects of the herbs are opened up, just as if you'd use those plants in the ayahuasca brew as an admixture. So this is not really a massive concern for many people. I'd say most people who make it and know what they're doing, I'd say just watch out. DMT is extraordinarily strong, and be very careful and really prepare yourself before going into that space.
You know, I'm really glad that you shared with me these thoughts about DMT as well, because I share a very similar perspective. You know, there definitely is an expansion of 5-MeO DMT making its way around the world, especially through the serving of the venom from the Bufo alvarius toad, otherwise known as the Sonoran desert toad. And there are many facilitators coming out that are offering this medicine. It's also really impacting the sustainability of the toad itself. So, you know, it's putting the species into danger because they're very sensitive. They're not necessarily prolific, so there's like conservation issues around. And then, of course, with more humans seeking the toads out, you know, it's really, you know, having an impact on the population. And so it's fascinating to see this, and also of great concern. And, you know, while I'm certainly not, you know, a prolific DMT smoker, I have had experience with the synthetic version of DMT, synthetic 5-MeO, and then Bufo alvarius. And I will say that it is an incredibly powerful psychedelic, and it's definitely something to be approached with great respect and caution. So I would love to ask you, given your experience in the DMT world, if you were to advise somebody who might have heard about Bufo, you know, 5-MeO or synthetic DMT, what would your advice be to them around how to be safe?
Well, I really think you need someone to give it to you and allow you to smoke it properly. Just as much with DMT or Changa, it's ideal that, especially if you're going to go into a breakthrough state, you're going to, have an out of body experience and really go into have a transcendental experience. You really need someone there to give it to you, to guide you to smoke enough of it, especially with N N-DMT. I really recommend that people be somewhere really comfortable, like their bed, indoors on a comfortable couch, somewhere they can lie down, really let go. And I think having someone there experienced who can give it to you, I really don't recommend people start off administering this themselves, especially the Bufo alvarius venom. I've smoked Bufo alvarius twice. The first time was just I did a little bit of it just to get a taste for it, and I felt like a toad. So I didn't smoke the rest of what I had. I wasn't interested. I have much experience with synthetic DMT, synthetic 5-MeO-DMT, which basically does the same thing as the Bufo alvarius toad, and it's exceedingly powerful stuff. But ultimately, I think that the 5-MeO takes people to the same place. And I just wonder how useful it is actually for people to keep going back into that place. You could call it source consciousness, or it appears like a very pristine, a priori, very familiar spiritual home that people come back to. I personally been to that place many, many times with N N-DMT and Ayahuasca and 5-MeO, and now I don't find value in going back there. I find it's better to just chop wood, carry water, just live my life, stop trying to seek these spiritual states, because I think after a while you don't need to. You can just do it once. You only really need to have that, what Shulgin calls a +4 experience once in your life, I think.
I agree. It was interesting because as I was emerging out of my Bufo experience, that incredible feeling of oneness and of lightness, of like putting down my karmic backpack and all my worries and completely surrendering to the universal one love of cosmic consciousness, was such a relief that as I was emerging out of it, I was thinking to myself, gosh, I can really do this every month. I need this once a month, And then as I started to, come to, as the time progressed, so like maybe, 30 minutes out, I was like thinking that, and then like maybe an hour out, I was thinking, maybe I'll just do this, once a season, once a quarter. And then as I started to really ground down more, I had this feeling of, I don't know if I need to do this again, or, if there's going to be much value, and maybe the next time I have this experience is when I transition, off this plane of existence and, at the point of death. But, really grew, as I became more grounded, I really started to have an appreciation for that experience, but also just, it's really quite strong, and it's not for everybody. And I do also hear of people that have this experience and end up a bit traumatized. And I'm curious to know, with your, expertise in this area, what do you know about some of the, risks that can occur? I've heard of some deaths, but I don't know much about it, whether it had to do perhaps with the combination of having that powerful psychoactive plus, being elderly and having a heart, heart issues just going into it. Have you heard of any types of physical risks or dangers around using these medicines?
Well, I think I have heard of issues with 5-MeO-DMT, but I think a lot of people, I haven't been able to get to the bottom of them. Mm-hmm. And 5-MeO-DMT is not really my specialty. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really clear on the trauma that you can experience from it. But I do have a lot of experience with N N-DMT, which is really completely different molecule.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with these really high doses, you can expose yourself to a lot of states of consciousness that are extremely intense. And I think in many respects very terrifying and stressful on the human psychology, on our consciousness. And I have known people who've really, kept trying to go back to those places as if they're trying to find the Holy Grail, trying to push further and further and deeper. And I've seen people who do that become really traumatized from what they've experienced, because it's just indescribably intense in a way that there's no earthly comparison for it. So I really do encourage people to, bring it back a bit. And that's why Changa came about, because that's the more sub-breakthrough experience. That's the more integratable experience where you're more working with your human self, just like with ayahuasca. I see a limited value in blasting yourself into the cosmos with 5-MeO-DMT or N-N-DMT.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. So I want to dive into another intriguing topic related to both, the DMT experience as well as the ayahuasca experience, where it seems like many people, when they have experiences with these medicines, will see other dimensions, other worlds, other beings. Crystalline cities apparently is a common theme in the DMT world. So wondering what your thoughts are on these visions and places that seem to get frequently reported by users, and then how to just interact with finding yourself in an alien civilization.
Well, for me, after all these years, people come and tell me their wild experiences in a state of confusion and bewilderment, and I just look at them and say, "Oh, that sounds pretty normal to me. I've heard all that before, So for me, none of this is particularly unusual. It's just another day at the office, actually. So I've been conducting interviews in Australia, talking to people about their understanding of the otherworldly phenomena that people experience. And I think I found one guy who I already know who believes that, no, it's just the imagination. And there's one other guy who, had a little bit of a sit on the fence viewpoint. But I'd say probably because DMT is so prevalent in Australia, and it's been around since the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of the people who really smoked a lot of DMT or taken ayahuasca, they're just like, oh yeah, no, that's just how things are. Yeah, you see that. Oh yeah, and just take it for granted. There's no theoretic, there's not many people really trying to interpret that and understand what it is. I think for me, at least, it did take me quite a number of experiences to just let go of my rational mind, my pseudo-rational mind, because it's not really rational, trying to make sense of this phenomena and just accept it for what it is and just experience it as it is. And of course, it is a big mystery, and that's the fantastic element of it. But I really do think that the meaningful element in these experiences is that they do show us we live in a very small slice of reality, and there's many, many different realities and dimensions, and what we are experiencing is a vast ecology of beingness with many different beings, many life forms, and you can see all that. And, being a bit of a seasoned explorer, for me, it's all, I wouldn't say it's mundane, but I've seen a lot of stuff, and of course, I'm still, it's interesting and it's eye-popping and amazing, but it doesn't shock or surprise me anymore. It's all pretty much like what you do experience when you go deep with the tryptamines, especially.
So how would you advise somebody who has been, having either, experiences of a paranormal phenomena through their encounter with ayahuasca or DMT? How would you respond to people that are, feeling like some of the encounters with non-embodied entities are a bit intrusive? So I've received messages seeking help around what to do about an alien abduction where they feel like they're being taken away and operated on. Or people who bring entities back from the Peruvian Amazon. Or, people who have experienced being attacked by spirits in ceremonies. Are there any particular techniques that you recommend that people can employ for self-protection or, during the event, as well as perhaps dispatching a spirit if one has kind of followed them back home?
It's really a tricky thing to deal with. And I think that many people in our day and age, they go to the Amazon expecting all the shamans to be superheroes who are going to protect them from all the bad guys. And it may not always be the case that when you drink ayahuasca in the West or in the Amazon, that you're necessarily going to not have interactions, maybe troublesome interactions with these spirits and these forces. So there's a couple of techniques that I use, and I use them in my daily life as well, because in my experience, we do experience these beings and entities in our daily life, but the ayahuasca just opens our eyes and shows them to us. So there is a particular technique that I think is one that I would recommend to people in the first instance. It's called sopla, and it's what the shamans in the Amazon use. And it's a technique where you're blowing on the entity who may be intrusive or problematic. And it's not this sort of blowing like I'm going to huff and puff your house down. It's not like it's not like that. The most effective way you can blow actually is like this. And you would have heard this sound before, maybe in recordings. And maybe people make this sound trying to sound shamanic, but they don't know what it means. But it's like this. So you're actually very quickly expelling air, and you're blowing very rapidly at the entity or whatever it is you're seeing. And if you keep doing this, they'll generally back off a fair bit, and they'll be like, okay, they don't like it. It can even kill them. Some of them can even kill them. So it's probably the first thing I would recommend to people. And there is a second technique that I utilize. I came across it, actually it was around the time that I got started in this, 1999, a friend of mine played a tape from some walk-ins from Sedona, and they had a technique that they called boogie busting, and they made this sound that sort of went a bit like that. And I some years ago, when I was particularly having problems with entities, I started using this sound, and it wasn't so much like that, but it was very much a high-pitched sound, a very forceful sound, and it goes like this. So just brace yourself a little bit. So that's a very high-pitched sound that I'm making, and it's very, very effective for dispelling pretty much anything you will encounter. However, it will kill them. It will destroy them. So you really must be aware to be very careful whenever you're going to destroy another life form, because for one thing, those life forms have friends. and they might have many friends, and then their friends might have many friends. So if you're not ready to engage in a battle, be very careful about attacking such an entity. I mean, many people talk about using love as a technique. Honestly, it can be not that easy to love some of the malevolence that you meet. It's not easy, and especially if they are very much attacking you, and in that case, when they are attacking you, it can be painful. You can be going into a very negative headspace. You can feel like you're going insane, and at that point where you're sort of a little bit possessed, it's too late. You won't be able to defend yourself often. But
is there anything that makes individuals more prone to negative entities?
In my view, it appears to me that some individuals are more threatening to these entities than other individuals, and some individuals will just never meet them, and I don't know why. Some individuals seem to have attracted a lot of entities to them. For myself, I can only say, because I'm someone who is pretty much in a consistent state of warfare with these entities. They come for me pretty severely. So that's why I'm really giving people a big warning that you've got to be very careful about destroying these entities and which ones that you attack, because it's almost a little bit like they mark you out as a threat, and rightly so. But if they are threatening your well-being and possibly even your life, you really must defend yourself, in my view.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, when I observe some of the conversations happening in the Ayahuasca group in Facebook, for example, and, like periodically something comes up with somebody having to deal with entities or parasites, and, and then there's always this contingent of people that says, well, just abide in love, or just live in the non-dual consciousness, and because there's non-duality, then they're, just not going to exist. And I'm kind of curious as to how effective this is, for a person that's feeling, like they're being bothered or attacked even.
Well, this is the thing, of course, if some people are abiding so much in non-duality and love, they're protected, which sounds fantastic. I'm certainly not at that level, presuming they're at a higher level, I don't know.
Yeah, but then they wouldn't be arguing on a Facebook, in a Facebook thread, obviously, If they were truly non-dual, they wouldn't be like trolling one love.
I think there may be an element of spiritual bypassing sometimes with some people. So I personally, this is something very real to me, and something that I experience consistently. So if you are one of these people, fantastic. But if you're not one of these people and you are experiencing them, I really do recommend defending yourself, and I think these two techniques work. They're the most powerful techniques that I've found, and in all these discussions on the ayahuasca forums and online, you don't find too many people presenting these really proactive techniques that work. And these are the two ones tried and true. One from the Sedona walk-ins and one from the Amazons in the rainforest.
I'm a big fan of using whatever works. So going back to working with teacher plants, how would you recommend that somebody approach working with the master plants in a way that optimizes the benefits of this type of work?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the plants have a sentience, that they have a spirit, they have a diva, that the plants themselves are actually healers, that they can heal you in a very deep and profound manner from the inside. It's almost like they can go into every cell and they can do surgery on you in a very deep and profound manner. So I really recommend people connect with the spirit and engage in a dialogue with these plants, because they can tell you so much about you and your life. I mean, it's commonly said that these plants, taking ayahuasca was like 10 years of psychotherapy, because it's a deep engagement with that. I think you would call it it's a no holds barred. It's uncensored. It's not coming from a human, but this advice, this feedback, it can often be very raw and real and relevant to you, and show you where you are at truly, in a way that maybe you can receive better from a plant than if a human would tell you something, all these things about yourself. You might be a bit more defensive, but it seems that people can really listen to plants, and the plants are offering this feedback to help us. They've got no agenda, but to help us look at ourselves and to understand ourselves more deeply, I think.
Do you have any advice on how an individual can strengthen their relationship to the teacher plants so that it really feels like an ongoing and solid spiritual alliance? So to really cultivate a teacher plant as a spiritual ally.
Well, I think I think it's useful to keep taking the plants, and especially if you find a plant you find to be a very strong ally, keep working with it, keep communicating with it, and be open to listen to it, and it will teach you, and it will share with you, and it will become an ally, and it will help you, and you can call upon it as well, really, at any time.
But what about for those of us who don't live in areas or countries where there's easy access to these plants? So let's say we have a Westerner who has felt a deep connection to ayahuasca, but they don't happen to live anywhere where it's easy to procure. How would somebody maintain that connection? Would you order some online, for example, and just take small homeopathic amounts of shredded capi?
Sure. I mean, you can drink capi tea, especially capi tea leaf. It's a fantastic drink. You can buy it online, and just a few grams of capi leaf is a fantastic tea that will have medicinal effects if you take it every morning. So, in the Amazon, they diet with the plants, and they make a tincture from the plants, and they sit with them, and they take, when they diet with the plants, they take that every day. I've personally not been into dieting with plants and gone through that process, but I understand it, and I think it's a valuable process. Before I got into this work in the late 90s, I started making flower essences from plants. And, flowers are the sexual creative expression of plants. And you basically, to make a flower essence, you put the flower in water and you leave it out in the sun. And the idea is that the sunlight and the water infuse the essence and the vibration of the flower into the water. And so the intelligence and vibration of the plant and the flower is then in the water, and then you go through a process of dilution, and you take drops of that flower essence. And this is something that anyone can do anywhere. You can make flower essences. You just need some 25 ml dropper bottles a glass bowl, water, and brandy, and anyone can do this. But perhaps the most valuable part of it is just where you sit with the flower and the plant, when you listen to it, when you take its essence and you listen to it communicate with you, you understand with it. Anyone at any time can go and hug a tree, spend time with plants, and just exercise that muscle and listen to it. It will communicate to you if you put effort into it, for sure. Imagine if, rather than meditating, if people spend all the time meditating that they spend meditating and spend it sitting in front of a plant or hugging a tree, I think a lot of people would become very quickly adept at communicating with plants.
So you mentioned the dieting with the plants practice that the curanderos do in the Amazon, and people who are apprenticing in that way. And I do know that within the indigenous perspective, I've heard some concern about the increase in Western facilitators, especially those who haven't spent years of dieting with the plants. So a friend of mine was just down in the Amazon dieting with the plants and spending time with the Yawanawa tribe, and he was sharing that in order to serve ayahuasca in their culture, you have to have dieted with the plant and for 5 years. I don't know if this is 5 continuous years. It might be like different intervals, but over over a 5-year time frame. And so I saw a letter of declaration of some of the concerns that the indigenous leaders have, the indigenous communities have in Brazil around the expansion of ayahuasca. And so I'm curious to know what your perspective is on Westerners serving medicines outside the cultural context without having done the traditional dietas, and whether this may be some form of cultural appropriation.
Yeah, well, you definitely could call it cultural appropriation, but cultural appropriation doesn't have to be a bad thing if it's actually, a useful culture. I'm probably more coming from the Terence McKenna perspective. His famous saying was, "Culture is not your friend." So I can only talk from my experience and my understanding. How I first got into this field was by taking tea from acacia phyllodes or leaves and Syrian rue. And Syrian rue is from the Middle East and Asia. And of course the acacia is from Australia. And likely the Australian Aboriginals use the Australian acacia, but they certainly don't generally talk about it to the Australian white people or anyone, because it's tied up in initiation. So I don't think we Australians could culturally appropriate that culture from them. So from my perspective, I never appropriated any culture. I just started to try and develop a culture that worked for the people around me. Mm-hmm. And I basically decided to learn and understand how to create a group context. So I really I taught myself how to do that, and these days I feel I'm pretty proficient in providing a really conducive container for people to really do a lot of deep work on themselves. So I understand, say, in the Shipibo context, for them, the dieting of the plants is so significant because it's really, for them, it's all about using or connecting with the plant spirits to help you navigate and heal, and it's really all about connecting to the plant spirits. So that's certainly their perspective. I don't necessarily work with the plant spirits in order to heal. I basically work with the spirits which are in the tea and have alliances and relationships with those spirits, for example, the spirits of the acacia trees in Australia, and I have very good relationships with them. So basically, I think it's quite concerning in many respects that a lot of people are starting to serve ayahuasca in the West, and there's actually not that many people who've really done that 4 or 5 years training to learn that particular paradigm, which could be Shipibo or Mestizo Peruvian. What you often find is people who may sort of utilize elements of the South American tradition without maybe necessarily having gone through that full training. So I'd be more concerned with people who maybe present themselves as being fully trained or authentic in that tradition when often they're really not. They haven't really done the years that it takes to do that. And I think, well, my view is the plants belong to all of us. So they don't belong to any culture. They belong in the earth. In Australia, people are growing ayahuasca vine. I've seen quite a few 20-year-old ayahuasca vines that are massive. They grow in the Australian earth. They don't belong to, Brazilian shamans. They belong to the people who grow them, who wish to share their medicine, who have relationships with them. So, and of course, you have many people around the world using Mimosa hostilis and Syrian rue as well, which there's not much of a tradition left of people using Mimosa hostilis traditionally. So my view is, I think we're creating a new tradition, and I just spoke to a lady recently who has spent 5 years in the Amazon doing all the proper training, and she basically realized that, hey, all this training wasn't enough. It wasn't enough because a lot of it wasn't actually relevant to the Western mind. So she's been actually bringing in all these Western practices and techniques that she's developing that she can really use with Western people as well, and then integrate that. And I think this is really where the future's at. For me, when I went to the Amazon and I did a dieta, I got the message, this isn't your path. This isn't relevant to you. Go back to Australia and keep doing your thing and keep learning and growing and doing your thing. So yeah, I think we all have different paths to take, and no one owns the plants. Anyone who can cultivate a relationship with the plants and find value and healing and benefit with them deserves the right to do so.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I would want to also just say that I often see people just throwing around the accusations around cultural appropriation without truly sitting down and reflecting exactly what that means. And so to give you an example, in the Brazilian Amazon, the indigenous people have faced 500 years of persecution and genocide. So many of the tribes lost their culture, lost their language, and had to turn to other tribes that maintained their traditions a little, more intact to teach them how to do indigenous practices and to learn about the medicines. And so it's kind of interesting. There's this, a reculturing of indigenous culture, between the tribes. And one of the examples that I heard of, and I have yet to really sit down with somebody who knows to verify this, but the Yawanawa, for example, are known for their powerful songs. But then I'd heard from people that I know who have spent a lot more time in that area than I have, that the Yawanawa learned their songs from another tribe. And so now, and the Yawanawa are known for their festival, and, the songs are making way around the world, and there's other tribes but hey, we taught you those songs because you guys were losing your culture and you wanted to bring that back into into your cultural life, because there's been a lot of evangelical Christianity as well, so there's been also a move kind of like splitting away from the evangelization of and wanting to reclaim the roots, and of course reaching out to some of the other tribes and shamans from the other tribes to help them reclaim it and to help teach it to them again. And so then it's like, well, okay, so this tribe appropriated the songs of this other tribe, so where does it end? And then I was having a conversation with a Huachumero in Peru, and he's just like, well, my ancestors were not working with Huachuma traditionally, because traditionally it's done at nighttime in the northern part of Peru, and the practice has really evolved, and we do it during the daytime. So, I would say before, just getting all your knickers in a twist about cultural appropriation, really sit down and ask yourself, what does that mean? And then who does it serve? Because, as much as I, recognize the concerns and the grievances of the indigenous people and the shamans and elders who have expressed their censure about, this type of practice, the truth is, the Westerners who are seeking healing through these plant medicines are still not going to be best served by a traditional indigenous shaman chanting their traditional chants. And they're not going to go to the Amazon and go, 3 days upriver to a village and sit on a dirt floor in an Indian village. They are going to want to work with somebody who has experience serving to Westerners and who may have training in, Western psychotherapeutic paradigms. So there's a value, I would say, that Western facilitators bring that cannot be served or fulfilled by traditional indigenous, curanderos.
Yeah, it's quite funny. I was drinking with an ayahuasquero in Colombia last year, and it can be the case that these indigenous ayahuasqueros can be corrupted by the West. And he just worked with a very small group of people, and he said to us, oh, I'm not interested in becoming like his rock star shaman friends, because he knew he would be corrupted by, the money and the power and all these seductive elements that he knew he would be corrupted by it. So he didn't want to go down that path. He just wanted to work with a small number of people and remain humble. And the interesting thing is, I had some hape with me. Some people call it rape, but I think it is actually hape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some, and he had his whole family there. And it's not part of any Colombian tradition, hape, but I gave him my little curipe and a little vial, and he loved it. His family loved it. This was a lot of fun for him. This was some new medicine, and I think this is just what human beings do. They share and they learn new cultures, and they adapt and they take what's useful and what works, and they let go of what doesn't work. So I think we're really evolving into we really are in a global culture now, and I think it's useful to keep our eye on the ball and keep what works and focus on what works for people, and be respectful of indigenous cultures, but also understand that like you said, they don't have all the answers. And especially when it comes to the Western people, a lot of Western people are really seeking, say, from ayahuasca, some sense of spiritual connection or awareness of other worlds or some sort of deeper understanding of themselves. For the indigenous mind, this is not such an issue. I mean, you go hang out with indigenous people, spiritual connection is not really an issue for them. They're generally, I find them quite grounded people who already have that kind of awareness. this is what the Western people are using the ayahuasca for. If you hang out in say Peru, the mestizo understanding of ayahuasca is really to treat the physical body. They're really looking to treat physical illness because that's the traditional way that ayahuasca is used, that you use it to treat the physical body. So really, in my view, all of how ayahuasca is being used these days, it's a whole new field that's developed in the last few decades where people, not just from the West, but all around the world are actually not using is the wrong word, but they're actually taking ayahuasca because they're looking for healing. They want to look into themselves. They want to have a look face their issues, and they want to do this deep work and have this spiritual cleansing that ayahuasca can provide. So I think that's fantastic, but I think it's important to recognize this is new. You know, a few decades ago, people weren't doing this. It wasn't happening.
Yeah. So we are coming to the end of our session, and I wanted to ask you if you would share with us an example of how your work within the paradigm that you, the container that you hold, how your work may have changed somebody else's life.
Oh, well, geez, hard. I mean, I think that especially, say, when you're working with ayahuasca, you're hopefully changing the life of everyone who drinks with you. But I don't never consider it to be about me. You know, it's not something I'm doing. It's something that the plants are doing. Nothing is particularly coming to mind, but many times people have been basically that they come to drink and they're like, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm going to commit suicide. And this has happened to me many times that people have drunk ayahuasca and decided to keep living. So I think that's a pretty good example.
You know, I just wanted to chime in and say, for me, you know, that was also instrumental as well. I had a childhood, a lot of childhood trauma growing up, and that resulted, I internalized a lot of that. And so I, in the earlier part of my life, really did struggle with suicidal ideation. And it was through a lot of spiritual work that I was able to turn that around. But the really, the key component of like just completely flipping the switch was when I first had when I had my first experience with ayahuasca and saw for the first time the beauty of my own spirit and in Technicolor. And having that direct experience, you know, which was so different from, you know, chanting mantras and being told, oh yes, we are all like, you know, a spark of the divine, we are all the Buddha within. You know, it was very much like this conceptual thing that I just kind of like repeated in prayers over and over, like, yes, you know, like I'm sacred too. But then it was like whoosh, like, you know, you are beautiful and this is what your soul looks like. And it was just like such an experience of like, I'm doing just fine. And I think, you know, for so many people to have that like genuine recognition, that direct experience of like, you know, you are just okay, you are beautiful the way that you are deeply loved by all of, you know, all of existence. It is something that can be really life-changing for people.
Absolutely. There's so much life-changing aspects when it comes to these plant medicines. That's why we're seeing so much growth. I mean, I'm seeing a cascade of articles in mainstream media all the time, and this is an incredible time of healing and awakening. I think we're really beginning to see that now. It's extraordinary.
Beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom with us, I would love to ask you about the free gift that you have for our audience.
Well, I'll do a video and explain torping and sopla in more depth. I'll make a little video about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And how can our audience best stay in touch with you, Julian?
I have a website. It's julianpalmerism.com, and I have 2 mailing lists. One's just my writings, which I put up, and I have a workshops email list as well. I'm focusing on retreats all over the world from now on in, and most of what I do is in Australia and South Africa.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I just want to wish you a beautiful rest of your day or evening, whatever it is on your side of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorna.